What if a 10-year-old Jon Snow read Rhaegar's letter and chose the dragon? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. The crypts of Winterfell are cold in a way that has nothing to do with the season. Jon knows this the way he knows everything about the castle, through repeated visits, through the long hours when the rest of the place is busy with people who have somewhere they are supposed to be. He is 10 years old. He does not always have somewhere to be. Not the way Robb does. Robb is always wanted somewhere. Jon slips away, and no one looks for him very hard. He comes here because of his mother. He does not know her name. He learned young that asking about his mother makes Lord Stark's face go somewhere far away and difficult, and so the question dies before it leaves his lips every time. But there is a face in the crypts he always comes back to. Not one of the old stone kings in their chairs with the iron longswords across their laps. A woman, set into the wall a little apart from the others, dark-haired, something fierce and unfinished in the expression, like the sculptor caught her mid-word in the moment before she finished saying whatever she was in the middle of saying. Jon does not know this is Lyanna Stark. He has only ever seen one woman with dark hair buried in this place, and he has decided she belongs to him. He sets his torch in a wall bracket and sits down on the cold floor in front of her, and is quiet for a while. Above him, the castle goes on without him. He can hear nothing from down here. That is the other reason he comes. He is sitting with his back against the base of a nearby plinth when he sees it. He has been coming here for years, and he has never noticed the seam in the wall before. But the torch is in a different bracket today, set further to the left than his usual one, and the light falls at an angle it has never fallen before. It catches a thin line in the stone, running behind the woman's effigy, following the curved wall. He gets up slowly. He moves closer. He traces his fingers along the seam, and finds, beneath the tip of his finger, a small knot of wax pressed into a hollow in the stone. His hand is shaking a little. He does not know why yet. He pries the wax loose with his thumbnail. The section of stone swings inward by a fraction, enough for him to get his fingers behind the edge and pull. Behind it is a space barely large enough to hold a strong box. Inside the space is a parcel, wrapped in oilskin, tied with cord that was once red. The color has faded until it is nearly brown. He takes the parcel out. He sits back down on the floor. He unties the cord carefully. Inside the oilskin is a letter. The parchment is stiff with age, but well preserved. Whoever wrapped it understood what they were protecting. The handwriting is unlike anything Jon has seen before. It is not the Castlemeister's careful, even script. It is not Lord Stark's cramped letters home from the south. This hand is formal and deliberate, but beneath the formality there is something urgent, as though the pen was pressed too hard against the page, as though the man holding it was trying to make the words last beyond him. Jon reads it. He reads it twice, then a third time. The man who wrote it begins with no greeting. He begins with a name. My son's name is Aegon. He is the son of my wife, Lyanna, daughter of Rickard Stark of Winterfell, whom I married in Dorne before the eyes of the gods, the ceremony performed by Septon Maynard, the annulment of my prior marriage duly recorded. He is not a bastard. He is legitimate. If you are reading this, something has gone wrong with the world, and the boy needs to know what he is. Jon stops here. He looks up at the stone face above him. Then he looks back at the page. The man who wrote this letter knew he might not return from a war he had helped to start. He writes about prophecy. The dragon must have 3 heads. The prince that was promised. Things Jon has no framework for and no words for yet. But he reads them carefully, because the weight of them is in the paper itself. He writes about Lyanna in a way that is too private, almost, and Jon's eyes move past those lines the first time through. He writes about what he wants for his son. Not a throne, not a crown. He writes, I want him to know that the world he was born to enter had love in it, whatever he was told afterward. He signs it. Rhaegar. Jon sits in the dark beneath Winterfell and holds his father's letter. Rhaegar Targaryen, killed at the Ruby Ford before Jon could draw his first breath. The Crown Prince of the Seven Kingdoms. Jon has heard this name, spoken with contempt and grief and fury all his life, every time the old war comes up around the fire, which is often enough in a castle like this. Robert Baratheon killed him. That is the version everyone tells. Robert loved Lyanna, and a Targaryen prince took her, and Robert hammered him dead in the middle of a river and took the throne, and that was supposed to be the end of it. Jon looks up at the dark-haired woman in the wall. He understands now why Lord Stark sometimes comes down here alone and comes back looking like he has been somewhere he cannot speak of. He wraps the letter in the oilskin again, very carefully, the way it was before. He ties the cord. He places the parcel in his lap and does not move for a long time. The torch burns. The Stone Kings sit in their chairs in the dark with their swords. Then he picks up the torch and goes back up through the dark. The courtyard light is sharp after the crypts. Robb is there with a practice sword, laughing, calling out for Jon to come and spar the way he always does. Robb's hair is auburn in the pale winter light. His eyes are blue. He is every inch the son of Eddard Stark, a boy who knows exactly who he is, and has never once had reason to wonder about it. Jon stands at the top of the steps and watches him for a moment. Then he goes inside. He does not spar. He goes to his room and sits on his bed with the parcel in his hands and his father's name turning in his head like a wheel that will not stop. Jon waits 3 days. He is not sure why he waits. Perhaps he is giving Ned Stark a chance to come to him first, to knock on his door and say the thing that should have been said long before now. But 3 days pass, and Ned doesn't come, and Jon watches him move through the castle the way you watch a fire you are not sure is safe to approach. Lord Stark is the same as he has always been. He rises before the rest of the household. He breaks his fast in the great hall and listens to the steward's reports and signs what needs to be signed. He listens more than he speaks, a man who carries his authority quietly, and when he does speak, the room adjusts to him without quite knowing it has done so. Jon has always admired this about him. He still does. That is the strange part. He goes to the solar on the morning of the 4th day. He carries the letter in his hand. He does not hide it in his sleeve or tuck it away. He carries it the way you carry something you have made a decision about. He goes up the stairs and pushes through the door without knocking. Ned is at the table with letters of his own, a ledger open before him. He looks up. He sees Jon. He sees what Jon is holding. For a moment, neither of them moves. Then Jon crosses the room and sets the letter on the table between them. Something passes through Ned Stark's face. Not one thing, but several, moving quickly, the way clouds move through the hills north of Winterfell in the hours before a storm. He looks at the oilskin. He looks at Jon. He does not reach for it. "Where did you find it?" he says. "It is not quite a question," Jon tells him. "The seam in the wall behind the effigy, the knot of wax, the oilskin inside." Ned closes the ledger. He stands and goes to the window. He stands with his back to the room for a while, looking out at the yard below. Then he comes back and sits in the chair by the window, the one he uses on winter evenings when the cold comes through the shutters. Not the chair at the table. He folds his hands. He tells Jon. He tells it the way he tells everything, without haste, without flourish, looking at a point slightly past Jon's shoulder, as though reading from something only he can see. He starts with the rebellion, because there is no other place to start. What everyone knows is that Robert loved Lyanna, and Lyanna disappeared, and the realm went to war. What they do not know is that she did not disappear, that she went. He tells Jon about the Tower of Joy. 3 King's Guard had been left to hold it. Arthur Dane, Oswell Went, Gerald Hightower, who was Lord Commander. Ned had ridden there with 6 men at the war's end, When the fighting was done everywhere else, all 3 Kingsguard died defending that tower. So did 4 of the men who rode south with Ned. Who was left? Jon asks. Only me, Ned says, and Howland Reed. Jon does not know the name. Ned says it quietly, as though the name belongs to that day and to no other. Howland is a lord of the Neck, a Crannog man, and Ned has not spoken to him of any of this since they left Dorne behind. He is the only other living man who was there. What happened inside? Jon asks. Ned is quiet for a moment. Then he says, Your mother. He tells Jon about Lyanna. She was in a bed of blood. She had given birth not long before, and the giving of it was killing her. She asked him to make promises. He made them because she was dying and because she was his sister, and because you make the promises the dying ask of you. She put the baby in his arms. She told him the baby's name. What name? Jon asks. Aegon, Ned says. Your name is Aegon Targaryen. The room is very quiet. Jon can still hear the yard below, the ordinary sounds of a castle morning, everything proceeding as it always has. He turns the name over in his head. Aegon. Not Jon. Not Snow. Something that belongs to a different world than the one he has been living in. Was she his wife? Jon says. Was she truly married to him? Ned says yes. A Septon performed the ceremony in Dorne, in secret, before witnesses. It was a legal marriage. The prior marriage to Elia Martell had been annulled by the same Septon before the new one was performed. Ned says this in the same steady tone he uses for everything, and Jon understands that Ned has recited these words to himself many times over the years since, has kept them accurate the way you keep a blade clean. So I am not a bastard, Jon says. You are not a bastard. Then what am I? Ned looks at him. The legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, he says. By law, by birth, by right of blood. Jon sits with this for a moment. Then he asks the question that has been sitting behind all the others. Why Ned never told him. Not one word in 10 years. Not a hint. Not even a name. Ned's jaw tightens. Robert, he says. Jon waits. Robert Baratheon is not a gentleman about the things he hates, Ned says. He destroyed Targaryen children in the sack. He burned that name from the world as thoroughly as a man can burn a name. If he knew you were alive and knew who you were, he would not hesitate. Not for a moment. Not for 10 years of having known you. He would not hesitate. Jon looks at his hands. He thinks about Robert Baratheon, who is somewhere south of the Neck on a throne in a city Jon has never seen. He thinks about the war hammer and the ruby ford and the word hesitate, and that Ned used it twice. He asks one more question. Did he love her? Ned does not answer right away. He looks at his own hands, folded in his lap. The silence goes on long enough that Jon almost takes the question back. Then Ned says, yes, he loved her. Whatever else was true of him, that was true. Jon nods. He picks up the letter from the table and puts it back in the oilskin and tucks it inside his shirt. He stands. He says nothing else. He goes to the door. Ned says his name. Jon stops but does not turn around. You cannot tell anyone, Ned says. Not Robb. Not anyone in this castle. You understand this? I understand, Jon says. He goes out and closes the door behind him. They do not speak of it again that night. Jon eats his supper in the great hall with the rest of the household. Robb talks about the sparring contest he won that afternoon. Theon makes a remark that gets 2 of the older boys laughing. The fire burns. Jon listens to all of it from somewhere just behind his own face, and when he eats, he does not taste the food. And when he finally looks up, Lord Stark is already watching him from the head of the table, just once, from across the length of the room. Then he looks away. The weeks after the conversation in the solar pass, strangely. Jon does not tell Robb. He sits across from him at breakfast and trains beside him in the yard and listens to him talk the way Robb always talks, with the easy certainty of a boy who has never needed to question his own story. Robb's plans fill the air around him the same as always. He wants to beat Theon at archery before the snows come. He is annoyed that one of the older horses has developed a limp. He has opinions about the fletching on the practice arrows that he would like everyone to hear. Jon listens to all of it and says the right things in the right places and watches his brother the way you watch a fire from across a room, warmly and from a careful distance. But he is watching him differently now. Robb has his mother's auburn hair and blue eyes. He looks like a Tully and like a Stark and like exactly what he is. The natural son of Eddard Stark, a boy who has always known the exact shape of his place in the world, because the world was built around him. Jon looks at him across the table and thinks about rivers. How a bank can look solid for years. How you only find out the ground has been shifting when you finally try to stand on it and discover that everything you thought was beneath your feet is 2 steps to the left of where you thought. He does not tell him. He does not come close to it. Instead, he starts asking questions in a different direction. The Castle Meister keeps a schedule of lessons that Jon has always attended, without much investment, learning enough to satisfy the requirement, and rarely more. There has been no expectation placed on him to be a scholar. He has never been the Lord's heir. But in the weeks after the Solar, he starts arriving before the others, and when the morning's reading is done, he starts asking questions that have nothing to do with it. He asks about the Targaryens. He frames it carefully, not as personal interest, historical curiosity, the kind of question a boy who had been rummaging through old chronicles might ask, which is to say, with studied idleness, the way you ask about a storm that passed through somewhere else. The Maester is glad enough to talk. The Targaryens ruled for nearly 300 years, he says. They had dragons, and the dragons were everything, the source of their power, the reason the lords of Westeros bent the knee and kept bending it generation after generation. When the dragons finally died out, roughly 150 years before the rebellion, the dynasty began to hollow from within. The last of the truly great kings held the realm together through wisdom and patience, and lived long enough for most of his work to survive him. After him came others, and the coin grew worn on one side, and by the time Aerys sat the throne, the flip had come up badly. Jon asks about Aerys. The Maester says, a man undone by fear. He was not always what history remembers, clever once, and with friends he valued, and wanting to be good. But something cracked in him, after a lord imprisoned him for months, and the crack let a particular kind of darkness in, and the darkness grew until he was burning men alive in his own throne room, and had made plans to set fire to the city, rather than let it fall to the rebels. The Maester says this last part plainly, with the even tone he uses for difficult history. Jon absorbs it without comment. He asks about Rhaegar. The Maester pauses before answering. The Crown Prince, he says, was a different matter entirely. A great knight and a great reader. Perhaps the most gifted man of his generation, by some accounts. He taught himself the high harp as a young man, and became finer at it than many who had played since childhood. But there was always something melancholy about him. He carried something heavy from an early age, and never quite managed to put it down. Jon asks, what was it? The Maester says, a belief that certain things had been written, that he was meant to fulfill something larger than himself. He lived very much inside that idea. He says this with the tolerance of a man who has made his peace with the fact that great men sometimes organize their lives around things that cannot be proven, and then moves the lesson forward. Jon lets him. He already has the belief memorized. He knows it line by line. Meanwhile, Theon Greyjoy has noticed something. He is 15, lean and dark-haired, and carries himself with the particular arrogance of someone who has decided arrogance is the only armor worth wearing in a castle that is not his own. He finds Jon one afternoon working through sword forms alone in the yard, slowly, with a focus that clearly belongs to somewhere other than the practice ground. He leans against the fence post across the yard and watches for a while with his arms crossed. Then he says, "You look like you found out something awful." Jon keeps moving through the form. "I don't know what you mean." "You've been walking around for weeks like someone set a stone on your shoulders. Did Lord Stark give you bad news?" "No," Jon says. "Then what is it?" "Nothing." Theon watches him for another moment, then shrugs. "Suit yourself," he says, and goes back inside. Jon watches him go. He thinks, Theon Greyjoy is the heir of an island and a drowned god, raised in another man's castle, and he fills every room he enters like he owns it, because the alternative is admitting that he does not. Jon understands something about that kind of performance now. He has been giving his own version of it for 10 years. He only now understands that that is what it was. The exchange with Catelyn happens a few days later in the Great Hall. The way these things always happen in a castle. By accident, neither of them choosing it. She is moving through with purpose, and Jon is crossing in the other direction, and the narrow space between the long table and the wall brings them face to face for a moment. She looks at him. Not with hatred. Something colder and more settled than hatred. The look you give something that has been placed in the wrong room, that everyone has decided not to comment on. Jon looks back. He does not look away first. He holds her gaze and thinks, she is not wrong. She has never been wrong. He does not belong here, not as Jon Snow, not as Ned Stark's bastard son. She has known it for 10 years. So has he. The only thing between them is the name they have both agreed to use for what he is. She moves past him. He moves past her. Nothing is said. But Jon is not the same boy on the other side of it. He goes to the crypts that evening. He sits in front of the woman in the wall and holds the letter without unfolding it. He knows every word. He knows where the pen pressed hardest and where the hand slowed, and the shape of his father's writing when writing quickly. He holds the parchment in the dark and thinks about what it is. Not a burden. He has been carrying it like one for weeks, and tonight he finally understands that is wrong. A burden is weight with no direction. This has direction. He cannot yet see where it points, but for the first time since he found it, that is not the part that matters. The direction exists. He can feel it the way you feel the current in a river, even when the surface looks still. That is enough. For now, that is enough. Jon waits several months before going back to Ned. He does not wait because he is afraid of the answers. He waits because he needs to be sure of the questions. He reads the letter so many times he can close his eyes and follow the ink across the page, the places where the pen hesitated, the places where it did not. He goes to the crypts and sits with the stone woman and asks her things she cannot answer. He watches Ned across the Great Hall and at lessons and in the yard, and tries to find the shape of what he does not yet know. And then one morning in early spring, he goes back to the solar. He does not bring the letter this time. He leaves it where it lives now, wrapped in the oilskin and tucked against his ribs during the day, and hidden in a loose stone behind his bed at night. He knocks on the solar door and waits to be told to enter, which is a courtesy he did not pay last time. Ned looks up from the table. He sees Jon and is still. "I want to understand the letter," Jon says. Not what it says. What it means. What he believed. Ned sets down the pen. He does not tell Jon to come back later. He does not say, "This is not the time." He has known, Jon thinks, that this conversation was coming the same way you know a storm is coming when the birds go quiet. He pushes back from the table and folds his hands and waits. Jon says, "The letter talks about a prophecy, the prince that was promised, the dragon with 3 heads. Rhaegar writes about it like a man who has arranged his whole life around a certainty no one else can see. Jon has spent months trying to understand what that certainty was. Ned says, 'Sit down.' Jon sits. Ned tells him what he knows, which is not everything, but more than Jon has. Rhaegar believed in a prophecy from old Valyrian texts, something about a hero reborn into the world at a time of great darkness. The prince that was promised. There was a comet involved, and a sword, and a figure called Azor Ahai, who the old stories say defeated a great darkness long ago. Rhaegar believed the time had come again. He believed his child would be the one foretold. Source: research. Extipabra 6, Constraint 5. Jon asks, which child? Ned is quiet for a moment. His third, he says. He believed the prophecy required 3 children, 3 heads for the 3-headed dragon. He had 2 with Elia Martell. You were the third. Jon turns this over. He says he left a wife and 2 children to go start a war because of this. Ned says, yes. And the war killed those 2 children. And it killed Elia. And it killed him. He says this plainly, without editorializing, which is the most devastating way to say it. Jon is quiet for a long time. Then he asks, does any of it matter now? Ned says, what do you mean? The prophecy, Jon says. Does it matter? There are no dragons. Whatever he believed, whatever he built his life around, the dragons are gone. They have been gone for 150 years. A Targaryen without dragons is just a man with a name. Ned looks at him. Something in his expression is difficult to read. He says, that is nearly exactly what I thought when I was carrying you north. Jon says, but. Ned says, but there are 2 Targaryens alive in Essos, your uncle Viserys and your aunt Daenerys. I know because Robert knows, and Robert has chosen, for now, to leave them be. 2 exiles wandering the free cities are less dangerous to him than the war it would take to remove them. Jon has known this since the Solar, months ago, but hearing the words aloud is different from carrying them in his chest. He says Viserys and Daenerys, an uncle and an aunt he has never met, living somewhere east of the Narrow Sea. He asks, how old? Ned says, Viserys would be 18 by now. Daenerys is 10. Jon says, a year older than me. She is a year older than me. Almost exactly, Ned says. Jon asks the question he has been building toward. He asks it slowly, because he has been practicing it for weeks, and still cannot quite make it land the way he wants it to. He says, does anyone else know about me? Anyone alive, besides you and Howland Reed? Ned says, no, and it must stay that way. Jon says, for how long? Ned does not answer right away. He looks at his folded hands. He looks at the wall behind Jon's head, at the ledger on the table, at the window where the light is coming in grey and thin from the north. He is a man who keeps his silences, like other men keep their money, carefully, and only for things that matter. This one goes on long enough that Jon understands the answer, is that Ned doesn't know. He says, there is something else I want. Ned waits. Jon says, I want to meet Howland Reed. I want to hear what he heard at the Tower of Joy. Not from you. From him. I have a letter from a man I never knew, and a confession from a man who did not want to give it. I want to hear it from the man who was there, and had no reason to frame any of it for me. The silence that follows is a different kind. Not the silence of a man who doesn't know the answer, but of a man who has been expecting the question and deciding whether he can refuse it. Jon watches Ned's face. He watches the line of his jaw and the way his hands tighten against each other. Then, Ned says, I will send for him. Jon nods. He starts to stand. Ned says his name. Jon stops. He is a good man, Ned says. What he kept for 11 years, he kept for you, not for me. Remember that, Jon says. I will. He goes out. The door closes. He stands in the corridor for a moment with the cold stone at his back and thinks about a woman 10 years old in a city he has never seen, moving between the houses of strangers, carrying a name that Robert Baratheon would pay to erase. His aunt. The word feels like a piece of armor someone has handed him without explaining how to wear it. He pushes off from the wall and goes to the yard. Robb is there with a practice sword, calling out a complaint about the morning's lesson. Jon picks up a sword and crosses to meet him and lets the sound of the sparring fill up the space where the thoughts were. That is the last conversation in the Solar for a while. Winter comes early that year, settling over Winterfell in a way that makes the stones feel smaller and the shadows longer. Jon trains and eats and sleeps, and does all the things that Jon Snow does. Somewhere below the courtyard, in the cold and the dark, his father's letter waits for him. He does not need to read it anymore. He knows what it says. Howland Reed arrives in the first week of a cold and muddy autumn. He comes under the pretense of a bannerman's visit, a lord of the neck stopping to pay his respects on his way through, which is the kind of excuse that only works because no one in Winterfell has any particular reason to question it. He travels with 2 companions and no ceremony, and the first Jon sees of him is a small man crossing the yard with Ned, speaking quietly, not looking at anything except the ground directly ahead of him. A Crannogman, small even by the standards of his kind, which Jon has learned are not large to begin with. Dark hair, weathered face, the look of someone who has spent a great deal of time outdoors in wet places. Ned brings him to the Godswood. Not the Great Hall, not the Solar. The Godswood, where the heart tree stands with its carved face, and the water around it barely moves, where the household does not go unless they mean to. Jon is already there when they arrive. He has been sitting with his back against the heart tree for long enough that the cold of the wood has come through his shirt. Ned says, "This is Howland Reed." Howland looks at Jon for a long moment. He does not say anything immediately, the way people sometimes do not say anything immediately when they see something they were prepared for and find that preparation was not quite enough. Then he says, "You look like her, more than I expected. The eyes are different, but the rest." Ned withdraws to the edge of the Godswood and stands with his back to them, which is the closest thing to privacy the Godswood allows. Jon says, "Will you tell me what happened?" Howland says, "Yes. That is why I came." He tells it differently than Ned told it. Ned tells stories like a man who has survived them, carefully, from a careful distance, choosing what to reveal and what to leave in the shadows of what he does not say. Howland tells it like a man who has carried it in his hands for 11 years and is finally being asked to set it down somewhere. He does not start at the Tower of Joy. He starts before it, at Starfall, at the end of a war with the dust still in the air. 7 men riding south on tired horses into the last hard task that the war had left them. 7 men south and 3 Kingsguard waiting. Arthur Dane, Oswell Went, Gerald Hightower, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard itself, the finest swords in the realm, or near enough to it. Jon asks, why were they there? Not at the Trident, not at King's Landing with the royal family. Why at that tower in Dawn? Howland says, that was the question your father left them to answer. They were the best he had, and he put them where the most important thing was. The tower held something worth guarding, more than his life was worth winning. He tells Jon about the fight. He does not spare the detail. He tells it the way a man tells the truth, without pride and without softening. 4 of the 7 did not stand back up. Ned and Howland walked out of that fight alive, because of skill and because of luck, and because Arthur Dane, who could have killed them, chose not to end it quickly, chose instead to hold his position in front of that tower door until the last possible moment. Jon asks, what was he like? Howland is quiet for a moment. He says, the finest sword in the realm. Not a boast, a fact. The way a piece of wood being oak is a fact. He could have taken us in the first exchange. He could have taken most men alive in the first exchange. But he stood his ground and held his line because he had been placed there, and the thing he had been placed there to protect was still behind the door. Jon thinks about this. He says, he died for me. Howland says, he died because your father put him there, and he believed in what your father believed. Whether that is the same thing as dying for you is a question you will have to work out for yourself. Jon says, what did you hear? Inside the tower. Howland says, a woman's voice. Weak. Weak enough that we all knew what that meant even before Ned went in. There were sounds before it that were not weak at all. And then quiet. And then Ned went in alone, and when he came back out, he had an infant in his arms, and a face like a man who has had a piece of himself removed and been told to keep walking. He did not say what she told him, not then and not after. But Howland knew. He had known before the fighting was done. He had known the moment he understood whose tower it was, and whose men had been set to guard it. Jon asks, "Why did you keep quiet?" 11 years. Howland says, "Ned asked me to." And the asking made sense. A living Targaryen boy in the north, in Robert Baratheon's Westeros. The quiet was the only thing keeping you breathing. Jon says, "Do you think he was mad?" "My father." Howland looks at him for a long time. He looks at him the way you look at something when you are trying to be honest. And honesty requires you to hold two things in your mind at once, and not let either of them fall. Then he says, "No, he was not mad. He was wrong about some things, and the things he was wrong about cost a great deal, more than he had the right to spend. But wrong is not the same as mad. He believed what he believed because he had reasons for it, and his reasons were not nothing. A madman does not leave a letter for a son he knows he will never meet. A madman does not arrange for 3 Kingsguard to guard a tower so that a child can be born safely into a war." Jon says, "And the prophecy?" Howland says, "I do not know what the prophecy means. I am not sure anyone does. But I know that the man who believed in it was not running from something. He was running towards something. Whether he was right about what it was is a different matter." Jon looks at the heart tree. The carved face looks back at him, blank and patient. He asks, "Will you stay?" Howland says, "A while. I have kept quiet 11 years. I can keep quiet a while longer. But boy," and he says it simply, not unkindly, "eventually you will have to decide what you are going to do with all of this. A secret that 2 men keep is a secret. A secret that one of them carries alone while the other ages is a burden. You are 11 years old, and you have been carrying it for nearly a year. At some point, it stops being something you hold and starts being something that holds you." Jon says, "I know." Howland says, "Good." Jon says, "I already know what I am going to do." Howland does not ask him to elaborate. He nods once, the way a man nods when he believes you, and then he stands and brushes the leaves from his coat and goes to where Ned is standing at the edge of the Godswood. Jon stays with the heart tree for a while longer. The water is still and the light is going out of the afternoon, and somewhere above him, the castle is moving through its ordinary business without any of it. He is 11 years old, and the son of a dead crown prince, and the ward of a man who loves him and cannot say so without breaking an oath he made to a woman on the last day of her life. He does not feel any of this as a burden. He is not sure why. He did not feel it as a burden the day he found the letter either. He has been waiting for the weight of it to become too much, and it has not. And sitting here in the cold, he finally understands why. It does not feel like a weight, because it has always been there. He was born into this. He has been carrying it since before he had words for what it was. He goes back to the castle as the light fails. Robb waves at him from the steps, and he waves back and goes inside. He does not tell Robb. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But he knows what is coming. The years pass the way years do in a cold place, slowly when you are inside them and quickly when you try to look back. Jon is 12, then 12 and a half, then 13, with his voice cracking and his arms longer than he knows what to do with, and a jaw that is beginning to suggest the shape his face will eventually settle into. He trains every morning and most afternoons, and the training has changed. He is not training to fit in. There is nothing in the yard at Winterfell that he needs to fit into. He trains because something is coming, and he intends to be ready for it. And because the work of the body is the one place where the noise inside his head goes quiet, he is good with a sword now. Better than good. Robb is the better natural fighter, always has been, probably always will be. The kind of physical gift that some boys are simply born into. But Jon is more serious. Jon does not stop until the thing is done. He drills the same form until he can do it in the dark, until his arms give out, until there is nothing left to correct. Theon Greyjoy, who is 17 and has opinions about everything, says one afternoon that Jon fights like someone who has decided fighting is the most important thing he will ever do. Jon says nothing. Theon is not wrong. Robb watches all of this. He does not say anything directly, the way he does not say anything directly about most things that make him uncomfortable. But Jon can see it in him. The faint furrow when Jon declines to come to the hall after supper, the way Robb checks to see where Jon is going whenever Jon goes somewhere alone. They still spar, they still eat together and complain about lessons and share the ordinary days of growing up in the same castle. But there is a distance in Jon that was not there before, a piece of him that stays back from everything, and Robb feels it without being able to name it. Jon doesn't know how to fix this without telling Robb the thing he cannot tell him, so he does not fix it. He keeps the distance and tries to make sure everything on the near side of it looks normal. The news from Essos arrives in the second year of this, near the end of a grey autumn. A raven comes to Winterfell addressed to Ned, from a merchant contact somewhere in the Riverlands, who passes along things that come to him from traders moving through the free cities. The content is oblique, the way these things always are when they concern matters that cannot be stated plainly. It places the Targaryen exiles somewhere in Pentos, in the household of a magister named Illyrio Mopatis. Both alive, the girl and the boy, together. The boy increasingly difficult, the girl quiet. Ned tells Jon that evening, in the solar, after the household has gone to bed. Jon asks, how old are they now? Ned says, Viserys would be 19, Daenerys would be 11. Jon turns this over. He says, she is a year older than I am. Ned says, almost exactly. Jon asks, what do you know about Viserys? Ned is quiet for a moment, in the way he is quiet when he is weighing what to say against what he knows. Then he says, unstable. Cruel in the way that frightened people become cruel, the kind that lashes out before anything can get close. He believes himself the rightful king of Westeros, and has believed it so long and so completely that it has taken the place of everything else in him. He is running out of hosts willing to feed him and his sister, and he knows it. Jon says, and Daenerys? Ned says, I know very little about her. She was too young when they left. Jon thinks about a girl his own age, passing through one borrowed house after another, in a city he has never seen, trailing behind a brother who is cracking at the edges. He thinks about what that is like. He thinks he has some idea. He says, she is my father's daughter. That makes her my aunt, by blood. It does, Ned says. And Viserys is my uncle. He is, Jon says, and neither of them knows I exist. The fire burns. The wind moves against the shutters in the particular way it moves in autumn in the north, finding every gap. Ned looks at the table, at his folded hands, at the place somewhere past Jon's shoulder, where he looks when the conversation has gone somewhere he did not mean to take it, and cannot now reverse. He says, Jon, whatever you are planning. Jon says, I am not planning anything yet. I am thinking. Ned says, the difference between those two things has grown smaller lately. Jon almost smiles at this. He says, you sound like Howland. Ned says, Howland has written again. He thinks the time is coming when something will have to be done. He does not say what. Jon says, I know what. The silence that follows is the kind that has become familiar between them over the past 2 years. The silence of a man who has accepted that he cannot stop what is coming and is trying to decide how much of himself to put in front of it. Ned is a lord of the north and a keeper of other people's oaths, and a man who has built his entire life on the principle that you hold the line, and you do not let it move. Jon has watched him hold this particular line for 2 years, and has watched the effort it costs him. He does not want to make it cost more than it already does. But he also cannot stop. He says, "Good night, Father." The word comes out the way it always comes out now, steady, deliberate, a choice. He started saying it sometime in the past year and has not stopped. Ned looks at him when he says it, and something in his face does something that neither of them has ever named. Jon goes to his room. In the morning he is up before the light, and in the yard before the others, and working through the same sequence of forms that he has drilled every morning for 2 years, in the cold, with his breath making clouds in the air, and the castle quiet around him. He does not think about what Ned said. He does not think about Viserys in Pentos, cracking and cruel, running out of patience, and hosts. He thinks about the next movement, and the one after that, and he moves. Theon finds him there an hour later, wrapped in a fur against the cold, with his arms crossed, and the particular expression he wears when he is about to say something he has been holding back. "You know," Theon says, "most boys your age are thinking about hunting. Girls. Whether they'll get a castle of their own someday." He tilts his head. "You spar like you're settling a debt." Jon keeps moving through the form. "Maybe I am," he says. Theon watches him for a moment. Then he snorts and goes back inside, which is what Theon does when he does not have a good answer. Jon finishes the sequence. He starts it again. Outside the walls, the year turns toward its end, and the ravens move between their keeps, and somewhere in a house in Pentos, a girl his own age is learning how to survive inside someone else's story. Jon does not know her. He does not know what she looks like, or how she speaks, or whether she has any idea what she carries. But he is beginning to understand that he needs to find out. He makes his case in winter, when the cold has settled into the stones of Winterfell, and the nights are long enough to think clearly. Jon is 13. He has been thinking clearly about this for 2 years, and in the past several months he has arranged the thinking into something he can hand to another person and have it hold together. He goes to the solar after supper, when Ned is alone with the ledgers, which is the hour when the interruptions have stopped, and his foster father's face is as close to unguarded as it gets. He closes the door. He sits across the table. He says, "There is a journal in the citadel at Old Town. A septon named Maynard recorded everything he did, his ceremonies, his annulments, his witnesses. He recorded the annulment of Rhaegar's marriage to Elia Martell. He recorded the marriage to Lyanna. Both entries are in the same hand, in the same book, sitting in an archive in Old Town that no one has touched in years. That journal is the legal proof that I am not a bastard. Not a letter that only you and I have seen. Not a witness who can be dismissed or silenced. An official record made at the time by the man who performed both ceremonies." Ned looks at him across the table. He says nothing immediately. Jon says, "If we do not go and find it, someone else will. Maybe not soon, but Robert has eyes in every city in Westeros, and the Citadel does not lock its records away. Whatever Maynard wrote is sitting there for any curious Maester to find. If someone loyal to the throne finds it first, that entry disappears, and with it goes the only documented proof that I was ever legitimate." Ned says, "Sending a raven about this." Jon says, "I know. I am not suggesting we send a raven to the Citadel directly. There are ways to ask a question without saying what you are looking for. A letter to a trusted man in Old Town, asking obliquely whether the old records of a certain septon's ceremonial work have ever been catalogued. Yes or no. Nothing else." Ned is quiet for a long time. He has the look he gets when he has already reached the end of his resistance and is working out how to say so. Jon has learned to recognize this look. It appears only after Ned has gone through every alternative and found them all worse than the thing he did not want to agree to. He says, "I know someone in Old Town, A man who owes the Starks a debt old enough that he would not ask why. Jon nods. He does not press further. This is the thing he has learned about Ned Stark. You make the case once, you make it well, and then you give the man room to walk through the door on his own. The Raven goes out 3 days later, in a message so oblique that a man who intercepted it would find nothing but a routine inquiry from a northern lord with a historical curiosity about the records of a particular septon's administrative work in Dorne, whether those records survived, and where they might be housed. Nothing more. They wait. In King's Landing, the waiting is of a different kind. The city is loud and warm, and smells of things Winterfell does not smell of, and at the center of the Red Keep, in a small and windowless room that belongs to no particular office, but which the Master of Whisperers has furnished to his own satisfaction, a bald and round and soft-voiced man sits across from one of his informants and listens to a report. The report is not alarming on its face. A raven from Winterfell passed through an intermediary in the Riverlands, rather than sent directly along the usual routes, heading south toward the Reach. The message itself, which his man in the Riverlands had briefly and expertly unsealed and resealed, was a historical inquiry. A lord curious about old ecclesiastical records. Nothing in the words to catch on. It is the direction that catches. Varys listens to the end of the report, and then sits for a while with his soft hands folded in his sleeves, and his eyes moving across the middle distance in the way they move when he is not looking at anything in the room. He has been in this city long enough to understand that the things that do not announce themselves are the things that matter. Lord Stark of Winterfell is a man who doesn't spend thought on history for its own sake. He is a man of duty and practicality doesn't send oblique ravens towards the records of dead septons. He thanks the informant and dismisses him. He sits for a while longer. Then he writes a short letter of his own, to a woman who does small favors for him in a household in the Reach, who has a cousin in service at the Citadel, who is good at listening to what the Meisters say when they think no one is listening. He asks her to pass along a question. Only a question. He wants to know if anyone has recently looked at the administrative records of a septon named Maynard, who worked in Dorne in the years just before the war. He seals the letter himself. He gives it to a boy who is not technically his servant, but is nonetheless entirely his. He doesn't tell anyone else. He does not act. He has been in this city for 15 years, and the patience is not something he performs. It is something he is. He waits. In Winterfell, the reply comes before the worst of winter sets in. The trusted man in Old Town has done as asked. The records exist. A septon named Maynard served in Dorne in the years before the rebellion and left behind several volumes of administrative work, now housed in the Citadel's lower archives. They have not been requested or examined in many years. Jon reads the reply twice and then sets it down on the table in front of Ned. He says, "We have to go there." Ned says, "A raven has done." Jon says, "A raven has done what it can. The record is in Old Town, and anyone with the right question and the right access can read it or destroy it. If we do not go and see it ourselves, we do not know what it says exactly, we cannot secure a copy, and we have no way of knowing who else has already asked. We have to go in person. You and me and Howland." Ned looks at the reply for a long time. He looks at the seal at the bottom, at the words in the middle, at nothing in particular. He is working through it the same way he works through everything, finding the objections first, testing their weight, seeing which ones hold. Eventually he says, "It is a long road to Old Town." Jon says, "I know the way." Ned looks up at him. Jon is 13 and dark-haired and grey-eyed, and built like a boy who has spent 2 years deciding that the body is a thing to be prepared. He looks like Ned's ward, or Ned's bastard, or any of the things Winterfell has called him over the years. He does not look like a Targaryen prince. He looks like what he has always looked like. A boy from the north, with his chin level and his jaw set, and a question waiting patiently behind. behind his eyes for an answer. Ned says, "In the spring, when the roads are passable." Jon nods. He goes back to his room and sits in the dark for a while. Outside, the winter has settled in fully, the kind of cold that makes sound carry differently and turns the yard into something silver and still. He does not take out the letter. He does not need to. He thinks about a road running south from Winterfell, through the length of the realm, past King's Landing, past Casterly Rock, all the way to the oldest city in Westeros and the archive at its heart. He has been waiting 3 years for a direction to move in. In the spring, he will move. The King's Road south takes longer than Jon expected, and less time than he feared. He has never been this far from Winterfell. The north gives way to the Riverlands, somewhere south of the Neck, and the Riverlands give way to the Reach, and the Reach goes on in a way that the north doesn't, wide and green and warm, even in late spring, with towns that smell of bread and river water, and things Jon doesn't have names for. Ned rides at the front of their small party with the composure of a man conducting ordinary lord's business, which is what the journey is supposed to be. The Warden of the North making a long overdue survey of certain border arrangements in the Reach, with his ward and a Crannogman lord travelling in the same direction for reasons that are their own. They skirt King's Landing entirely. Ned does not explain this, and Jon does not ask. Old Town announces itself from a distance. It is the oldest city in Westeros, older than the Faith and older than the Conquest, and it looks it. The harbour is full and the streets are layered the way old places are, building over building, century over century, the new sitting on top of the old, and the old sitting on top of something older still. At the city's heart, the citadel rises, chain and stone and iron, the home of the Maesters, the place where the ravens are trained, and the knowledge is kept, and the records go to live out their long and undisturbed years in the archive. They take rooms at an inn near the harbour, and rest one night. In the morning, Ned goes ahead to the citadel alone, to present his credentials and arrange the access. He is the Warden of the North, a great lord of the realm, with a stated interest in historical church records from the late reign of Aerys II, specifically the administrative work of travelling septons who conducted ceremonies in Dorne in the years before the rebellion. A genealogical matter. Routine. The access is granted. That afternoon, Jon and Howland enter the archive with an acolyte who guides them through corridors that smell of old parchment, and something older than parchment, something that belongs only to rooms where things are kept for a very long time. Jon does not rush. He has been working toward this for 4 years. He has the letter in its oilskin somewhere in the bottom of his pack, still. He has Ned's confession and Howland's eyewitness account, and his own grey eyes staring back at him from every polished surface, in a face that he has been told, quietly and more than once, looks like Lyanna Stark. He has all of that. What he does not have is paper that does not belong to him. A record made at the time by an impartial hand that will still be here when everyone who remembers it in living memory is gone. The acolyte leads them to the correct section, the journals of septons from the era of Aerys II, organized by name. Jon asks for Maynard. The acolyte brings the relevant volume without curiosity, the way people in archives bring volumes without curiosity, because curiosity about records is not what they are paid for. Jon carries the journal to a reading table in the corner. Ned stands at the door. Howland Reed stands near the window, not quite looking at Jon, not quite looking away. The journal is small and densely written, the kind of record kept by a man who was serious about his office and expected someone to review his work someday. Jon moves through it slowly. Births, deaths, marriages, annulments. The entries are brief. Maynard was not a man for ceremony in his writing, whatever he may have been in his practice. Then he finds it. The entry is not much longer than any other. It records an annulment. The marriage of Rhaegar Targaryen, Crown Prince of the Seven Kingdoms, to Elia Martell of Dorne, dissolved on grounds of dynastic necessity at the request of the prince, in the presence of two witnesses whose names Maynard has recorded. The dissolution is noted as canonical under the laws of the faith, conducted according to proper form. Below it, on the same page, in the same hand, a marriage. Rhaegar Targaryen to Lyanna Stark, daughter of Rickard Stark of the North. Same date, same witnesses, same septon. Jon reads the entry 3 times. He is 14 years old and standing in a cold archive room in the oldest city in the world, and the words on the page are very small and very clear. He has known for 4 years what they would say. He has known it from the letter, and from Ned's confession, and from Howland's account of a tower in Dorne, where 3 knights of the King's Guard chose to die rather than abandon their post. He knew. He has known for 4 years. But knowing is one thing, and reading is another. And for a moment, the archive is very quiet, and his hands are very still on the page. He looks up at Ned. Ned is watching him from the doorway. His face is doing the thing it does when something costs him that he cannot allow himself to refuse. Jon looks at him and does not say anything, and Ned looks at him and does not say anything, and that is enough. Everything that needs to pass between them passes in the silence across that cold room. Then Howland comes to the table and reads it himself, standing, bending over the open volume. He straightens, he nods. 3 witnesses, the same number who walked away from the Tower of Joy. They discuss briefly what to do. Taking the journal is not possible. A missing volume from the Citadel's archive would be noticed, and would raise questions they cannot afford. Destroying it would erase the proof they came to find. They do neither. They leave it where it is, on the shelf where it has sat undisturbed for years, with only the knowledge that they have been here and what they found. Jon makes a copy of the relevant entries in his own hand. The exact words, witnessed and dated by Howland Reed in his capacity as a Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. It is not the original, but it is something. They leave the archive before the light goes, and walk back through the layers of Old Town toward the Harbour Inn, and the city goes on around them with its smell of salt and old stone, and the 1,000 ordinary things that cities do in the evening. That night, Jon and Ned eat alone in the inn's upper room, while Howland keeps watch below. The food is better than anything Jon has eaten in the north, which he does not notice. He eats without tasting, and looks at the copy of the entry sitting on the table between them, folded in his own hand. He says, "I am going to find Daenerys and Viserys." Ned sets down his cup. Jon says, "Not now, not from here, but soon. They are alive in Essos, and they do not know I exist, and that cannot remain the way things are. I need them to know. At the very least, I need her to know." Ned says, "If you go to Essos, Robert will." Jon says, "Robert doesn't know. And he won't know. Not yet. We have gone 3 days' ride past King's Landing, and he has not noticed. A boy from the north going east for his own reasons is not a thing the king will hear about." Ned says, "You are not a boy from the north." Jon says, "No, but that is what he will see if he looks." Ned is quiet for a long time. He looks at the folded entry on the table, at his cup, at the candle burning between them. He is a man of 34 who has kept a secret for 14 years, and has spent the last 4 years watching that secret become something that moves on its own, that makes its own decisions, that sends its own ravens and reads its own archives. He does not look surprised. He looks like a man who has been watching a river build toward something and knows now that it has arrived. He says, "Spring. You go in the spring." Jon says, "Yes." Ned says, "And I go with you." Jon looks at him. Ned says, "You are not going east alone. You are 14 years old, and you are going to a continent you have never seen to find a man I know to be cruel, and a girl I know nothing about. You are not doing that without me." Jon does not argue. He picks up his cup and looks at the candle and thinks about a girl somewhere in the free cities who does not know his name and will not know it for much longer. Outside, Old Town goes about its evening. The harbor lights move in the dark. The citadel stands over the city the way it has stood for 1,000 years, full of the things that are kept and the things that are remembered and the things that are true even when no one is looking at them. The message arrives with the morning bread. No name on the outside. No seal. Inside. A time, late afternoon. A location, a candlemaker's stall on the street that runs along the harbor's western edge. And below that, in a hand that is careful and small and gives away nothing. Valar Morghulis. Ned reads it once and sets it down on the table with the particular stillness he reserves for things he would very much like to throw into the fire. Jon picks it up and reads it. He says, "We go." Ned says, "We absolutely do not go. We do not walk into unmarked meetings in cities we do not know, arranged by people who do not sign their names. We leave Old Town this morning as planned, and we forget that this arrived." Jon says, "Someone knows we are here. Someone knew to send this to this inn, to this room, on the morning after we visited the archive. If we leave without going, they will still know we were here, and they will know we were afraid of them. That is worse." Ned looks at him for a long moment, with an expression that belongs in a different context, the expression of a man realizing that the boy across from him has been thinking more carefully about the world than the man has been giving him credit for. He does not say so. He says, "We go armed." Jon says, "Yes." The candlemaker's stall is exactly what it sounds like, tucked between a sailmaker and a counting house on a street that smells of wax and brine. They arrive early. There is a man already there, examining a tray of tapers with the unhurried focus of someone with nowhere in particular to be. He is not particularly large and not particularly small, round in the way of a man who eats well and moves carefully, bald, with a face that is smooth and soft and tells very little. He is dressed as a merchant of the middling sort, unremarkable in every particular, and he is the most precisely unremarkable person Jon has ever seen, which is itself a kind of information. He looks up when they arrive. He smiles. He says, "Lord Stark," and the boy. "Good." He says this the way you greet people you have been expecting for some time. Ned says, "Who are you?" The man says, "In this city, I am a merchant who trades in cloth. In King's Landing, I am rather differently employed." He pauses, as if to allow this to settle. Then, "You will have heard me called the Spider." Ned goes very still, the kind of stillness that is not calm, but is the thing you do instead of what you want to do. Varys, the master of whisperers of the Iron Throne, sets down the taper he was examining and folds his soft hands and waits. Ned says, "How long?" Varys says, "Since before the boy was born. I was master of whisperers under Aerys before I was master of whisperers under Robert, and Aerys was a man who noticed things about his heir. What was happening between Rhaegar and the Stark girl was not something that stayed entirely hidden, not from a man whose occupation is noticing what is not supposed to be noticed. I knew. I let the knowing stay where it was, because the realm needed what it needed at that particular moment, and what it needed was not a dead infant and another body at the end of another sword. Ned says, "You could have told me. 14 years you have kept this." Varys says, "I kept it alive." There is a difference. He says this gently, without inflection, the way facts are stated rather than argued. His eyes move to Jon. He says, "You have his height already, I think. You will be taller than he was. The eyes are your mother's." Jon says, "Why are you here?" "Not in Old Town, generally. Here. This morning." Varys says, "Because you visited an archive yesterday and found what you went looking for, and because you have a plan that I believe I can improve upon, and because it is my particular habit to be useful before I am asked rather than after." It is a more efficient approach. He tells Jon then, plainly and without ornament, what Jon's position in the succession is. The legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, ahead of Daenerys Targaryen in the line of succession, because she is Rhaegar's sister, not his child. Ahead of Viserys, because Viserys is Rhaegar's brother, and a son outranks a brother. The Iron Throne, by every law the realm has ever recognized, belongs to the person who is standing in this harbor street, talking to a candlemaker at the age of 14. Jon says, "And you want me to claim it?" Varys says, "I want the realm to be what it needs to be. Whether that is the same thing as what you want remains to be seen." Jon says, "And what do you think the realm needs?" Varys is quiet for a moment. He looks at Jon with that quality of attention that feels less like being seen and more like being read. Then he says, "Stability, rulers who govern rather than survive." The Baratheon reign has not been bad as these things go. Robert is not his predecessor, but it will not hold. It is built on a foundation that was always going to crack, and the crack is coming sooner than anyone at court has admitted. When it comes, the realm will need somewhere to look. Jon says, "You want me to wait." Varys says, "I counsel patience. Viserys Targaryen is not a man who will hold an alliance together. Robert Baratheon has the loyalty of the realm's great lords, and a king's guard led by a man who served his predecessor honorably. The time is not now. The time is when the game has moved far enough that your arrival changes what is possible rather than simply ending what you have." Jon says, "I am not waiting for the game. I am going east to find my family and let them know I exist. Then we will see what follows from that." Varys watches him. Jon says, "You said not to go to Viserys first. Find the girl." "Why?" Varys says, "Because Viserys Targaryen has spent 20 years believing himself the last hope of his house and the rightful king of everything he has lost. A nephew who outranks him and carries a better claim is not news he will receive gracefully. He is not a man who can hold two ideas in his head when one of them threatens him. The girl is different. She has spent the same 20 years understanding that survival requires other people, and that pride is a luxury the exiled cannot afford. She is your better entrance to that family." Jon says, "She is 13 years old." Varys says, "She will not be forever. Neither will you. And the bonds formed between people who understand each other before they are powerful tend to hold longer than the bonds formed afterward." Ned, who has been silent through all of this, says, "And what do you want from us? For this counsel? For this keeping of secrets?" Varys says, "Nothing yet." He says it with the mildness of a man quoting from a much longer patience. "I want the realm to be well governed. When the time comes, I will ask for whatever small assistance serves that end. Until then, go east. Be careful. Do not announce yourself before you have someone beside you worth announcing with." He picks up a taper from the tray and pays the candlemaker, who has been quietly not listening to any of this, and turns to go. Jon says, "You will tell no one what you know." Varys pauses. He looks back. He says, "Lord Snow, or Lord Targaryen, or whatever name you are using for yourself this year, I have known what I know for 15 years, and told no one who would use it badly. I am not going to begin now." He smiles once more, the same careful smile, and then he is moving away along the harbor street, and within moments the crowd has taken him, and he is simply not there. The street is loud and warm and smells of the sea. Ned stands beside Jon, and they are both quiet for a while. Then Ned says, "He is known since the beginning." Jon says, "Yes." Ned says, "And he let you live." Jon says, "I noticed that part too." They leave Old Town the next morning, before the city wakes. They ride north for a while, until Old Town is behind them, and the road is quiet, and the day is theirs. Then Jon says, "Spring." We go east in the spring. He says it the same way he has said other things over the years. Not as a question, not as a plan being formed, but as a thing that has already been decided and is simply waiting on the calendar. Ned says, yes. They ride north, and the harbour shrinks behind them, and somewhere in the city they are leaving a bald and unhurried man settles into whatever comes next and waits, the way he has always waited, for the world to arrange itself into something worth using. The first raven says, Jon Arryn is dead. The second says Robert Baratheon is riding north. Jon reads both in the solar, sitting across from Ned, who has already read them, and is looking at the table with the expression he wears when something he was always expecting to happen has finally happened, and the fact of it is both exactly what he feared, and somehow worse than the version he feared. He has been Hand of the King's oldest friend for 15 years. Jon Arryn was the man who kept the peace. Jon Arryn was the man who kept other men from asking certain questions. And now Jon Arryn is dead, and Robert Baratheon is coming north, and he will be in Winterfell in a matter of weeks. Jon sets down both ravens and does not say anything for a long moment. Ned watches him. He says later, privately, to himself and no one else, that the stillness on Jon's face in that moment frightened him more than any outburst would have. It is the stillness of a boy who has been preparing for something for 5 years and has just been told it is arriving on schedule. Jon says, when? Ned says, 3 weeks. Perhaps 4. Jon says, I understand. They speak alone the morning before the royal party is expected. Ned is measured and deliberate in the way he is deliberate when he has already thought through every version of what he wants to say and settled on the plainest one. He says, Robert will be in this castle. He will look at you, and he will see Ned Stark's bastard, and you will give him every reason to keep seeing exactly that. You will not look at him differently than you look at anyone else. You will not give him anything to find. He does not know you exist. That fact is the only thing keeping you alive, and you are going to keep it that fact. Jon says, I know. Ned says, Jon says, I know, father. I have known for 5 years. I am not going to do anything. The word father lands the way it always lands when Jon uses it, which is with a kind of weight that Ned never quite manages to treat as ordinary. He looks at Jon for a moment. Then he nods. The royal party arrives on a grey afternoon, with the household assembled in the courtyard, and the banners out, and everything in its correct position. They come through the gates with the sound that large parties make, horses and armor and voices, and the particular energy of people who have been riding for a long time and are glad to have arrived somewhere. Robert Baratheon rides at the front. Jon has heard him described his whole life. He knows the shape of the man from stories told at every fire in every castle in the north, the warrior who won the realm, the king who hammered a Targaryen prince into the Ruby Ford and pulled a crown out of the wreckage. He was expecting something. He is not sure what. What he sees is a large man, massive in the way of someone who was built for war and has been slowly, steadily reshaped by 15 years of a different life. Black-haired, blue-eyed, with a beard that is going grey at the edges, and a laugh that carries across the courtyard as soon as Ned descends the steps to meet him. He swings off his horse and grabs Ned by the shoulders, and the warmth between them is real. The warmth of 2 men who fought beside each other and have not forgotten it. And Jon watches all of this from his place in the household line. Robert moves through the yard. He greets Catelyn. He looks at the Stark children. He pauses in front of Robb and says something that makes Robb stand a little straighter. He passes Theon with a glance, and nothing more. And then he comes to Jon. He looks at him. It is not a careful look. It is the look a man gives something he has catalogued quickly and will not think about again. He says, Ned's bastard. Good face. Not much of the Stark in him, is there? He says it easily, to Ned and not to Jon, the way you remark on a horse's colouring. Then he moves on. Jon watches him go. Robert Baratheon has looked directly at Aegon Targaryen, has looked at him with those blue eyes from a distance of 4 feet, and seen a bastard boy with dark hair who does not much resemble his father. The grey eyes and the dark hair have done their work. The face that is Lyanna's face, that Howland Reed recognized in a moment, has told Robert Baratheon exactly the story it was always telling, which is the story of a northern bastard who does not belong to anything important. Jon stands in the courtyard and breathes. In the party behind Robert, Cersei Lannister rides with the composed attention of someone who never stops working. She is 32 and still extraordinarily beautiful, with her golden hair and the kind of face that is constructed to be seen. Her eyes move across the Stark household, the way a surveyor's eyes move across new ground, cataloguing and assessing, not missing anything. They pass over Jon the same as they pass over everyone else, and Jon watches her pass and thinks, she is the queen, and she knows what queens know, and whatever she is looking for here, it is not a bastard boy in a northern courtyard. At the back of the escort, in the white cloak of the King's Guard, Jaime Lannister rides. He is 32 and golden, and dangerous in the particular way of men who are very good at something that most people cannot do at all. He is handsome in a way that does not invite approach, and competent in a way that does not need to announce itself. He scans the courtyard once, professionally, the way a man who guards kings learns to scan spaces. His eyes pass over Jon without stopping. Jon watches him pass. He thinks, this man killed Aerys, his father's father, my grandfather. He did it in the throne room, in front of the Iron Throne, while the city burned outside. He has been called Oathbreaker and Kingslayer his whole life for it, and he wears those names the way he wears his cloak, like they belong on him, and he has decided not to argue about it. Jon does not know what to feel about that. He files it away with the other things he does not yet know what to feel about, in the long and patient inventory that has been accumulating for 5 years. The feast that night is everything a royal feast is supposed to be, and Jon endures every minute of it. He sits far down the table, well below the salt, in the place appropriate to a lord's bastard son. Robert is at the top of the table, and is immediately, comprehensively drunk, which does not diminish him. It seems to have the opposite effect, expanding him, making him louder and warmer and more present than any other person in the room. He tells war stories. This is apparently what Robert does at feasts, fills the hall with the wars he fought and won, with the men he loved who did not survive them, with the great moments of a life that is still somewhere in the past, being lived, while the current one goes on around it. His audience laughs and raises cups and feeds it back to him. And then he tells the trident. It is not a long story. Robert does not tell it the way a man tells something sacred. He tells it the way he tells everything, loudly, with his cup in his hand, and his eyes bright with wine. The river. The ford. Rhaegar coming across the water with rubies on his armor and a sword in his hand. The blow. The rubies scattering into the river like blood. Jon sits at the far end of the table and listens to his father's murderer describe the killing in the cheerful, reliving tone of a man for whom it is simply the best moment of his life. He does not react. His face is still. He eats what is in front of him, and drinks what is in his cup, and keeps his eyes on the table for most of it. And when he does look up, he does not look at Robert. He looks at Ned, who is sitting beside the king, and who is also keeping his face very still, in a different way. The way of a man performing an act of endurance that he didn't ask to perform. Their eyes meet once across the length of the table. That is all. When the feast is done, Jon goes to his room and sits on the edge of his bed in the dark, without lighting a candle. The castle settles around him. Robert's laughter echoes somewhere below, fading. Jon sits with his hands on his knees and breathes in the dark. He is 15 years old, and the man who killed his father just ate at his table and called him a bastard with a good face. He is not going to be in this castle much longer. Robert makes his offer to Ned on the second day of the visit, in the crypt, alone. Jon is not there. He learns of it the way he learns most things in this castle. Afterward, from Ned, in the solar, with the door closed and the fire low. Ned sits across from him and tells him plainly, Robert wants him to come south, to be Hand of the King, to go to King's Landing and stand at Robert's right hand, the way Jon Arryn stood there for 15 years. Robert says there is no other man he trusts. He says it the way men say things they mean absolutely, without ornament, and Ned, who has seen through Robert's posturing since they were boys, believes him. Jon listens to all of this without interrupting. Then he says, "Take it." Ned looks at him. Jon says, "Go south. Go to King's Landing. You can do more from there than you can do from here. You can hear what is being said and manage what needs managing. If Robert starts asking certain questions, you are in the room. If something happens and I need time, you are in the position to buy it. Staying in Winterfell while I go east means neither of us has any influence over anything that happens below the neck." Ned says, "And you?" Jon says, "I go east, as we said." Ned says, "You are 15 years old." Jon says, "And you were younger than that when you went to the Vale as Jon Arryn's ward. You were my age when a war started, and you were expected to ride in it. I'm not going to battle. I'm going to Essos to find 2 people and introduce myself." Ned looks at him for a long time. He has the expression he sometimes gets when the argument is over, and he knows it, and has not yet finished working through the fact that it is. Jon has come to recognize this expression over the past 5 years. It is not defeat. It is the look of a man who raised a boy he thought was his bastard, and has spent 5 years watching that boy become something he did not anticipate and cannot quite contain. He says, "Howland goes with you. That is not a discussion." Jon says, "I know. We have already spoken." Ned says, "You have already spoken." Jon says, "I did not think you would say no to Howland." Ned's mouth does something that is almost not a smile. He says, "And what are you going to say when you find them? What exactly are you planning to walk into that house in Pentos and say?" Jon says, "I'm going to say that my name is Aegon Targaryen, that I am the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, that I was born at the Tower of Joy and Dawn, and that I would like to know my family. Then I am going to listen." He says, "And if Viserys is as dangerous as everyone seems to think?" Jon says, "Howland will be with me, and we will have made sure certain people know where we are. Varys told me to find Daenerys first. I intend to." Ned says, "Varys's counsel is not a guarantee of Varys's protection." Jon says, "No, but it is the best information I have from the person most likely to know." The fire burns. Outside, the castle is going about the business of hosting a king, which is a great deal of business. Somewhere in another wing, Robert Baratheon is being loud and happy and attended to. In this room, 2 people are having the conversation that will separate them for the first time in 15 years, and they are both trying to make it look like a plan rather than what it is. Ned says, "One condition." Jon waits. Ned says, "No moves without word to me first. Whatever you decide in Essos, whether you make contact or hold back, whether the girl is what you hoped or nothing like it, whether Viserys receives you or runs you out, you send a raven to me before you act. Not after. Before." Jon says, "I will." Ned says, "I mean it." Jon says, "I know you do, and I mean it too." He pauses. "For now." Ned looks at him. Jon says, "I cannot promise you forever. The situation will move, and I will have to move with it. But I promise you, I will tell you what I can while I can." Ned is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "That will have to do." He stands. He crosses to where Jon is sitting and stands in front of him and looks at him for a long time. Jon looks back. They have been doing this for 15 years. This looking, this accounting of each other, this practice of saying things without words that they have developed between them in the years since the Solar and the letter and the first broken confession. There is a great deal in the looking. Then Ned puts his hand on the side of Jon's face. It is not something he has done before. His palm is warm, and the gesture is careful, and it lasts only a moment, just long enough for Jon to understand what it is. A thing that belongs to someone else, translated through a man who loved her, given now to the only person it was ever meant to reach. He does not say anything. He takes his hand away. Jon does not say anything either. He goes to bed that night and does not sleep well, and in the morning he is up before the light with everything already packed, because he packed the night before. He goes to the stables. Howland Reed is already there, which is no surprise. He is small and quiet in the half-dark, and he has his own pack over his shoulder, and the look of a man who has been waiting for this particular morning for a long time and has made his peace with it. They ride out at dawn. Jon does not look back immediately. He rides through the gate and along the road and lets the castle fall behind him, and then at a certain point he looks back because he knows what he will see, and he needs to see it. Robb is on the battlements. He is standing with his hands on the stone and his auburn hair lit by the early light, watching Jon go. He does not know what he is watching. He does not know it is a farewell. He knows only that his brother, his foster brother, his closest companion for 15 years, is riding east with a Crannogman lord and a travelling pack and no explanation that was ever fully satisfying. Robb has not pushed for the explanation. That is one of the things Jon has always loved about him. He pushes up to the edge, and then he trusts, because he was raised to trust by the same man who raised Jon. Jon looks at him for a moment from the road. He does not wave. He does not call out. He turns back to the road ahead and rides. In the yard below, Theon Greyjoy is leaning against the stable door with his arms crossed, watching them go. He says it to the air beside him, to no one in particular, in the tone he uses for things he finds faintly annoying. Where is the bastard going? No one answers him. The road opens up ahead of them, and the morning comes in properly, grey and cool and northern, and Winterfell shrinks behind them, the way everything shrinks when you ride away from it, which is slowly, and then all at once. Jon does not look back again. He thinks about a girl in Pentos he has never met, who has his father's blood and his father's name, and has spent 15 years surviving in borrowed houses. And he thinks about a letter written in a tower in Dawn by a man who believed in things written in the stars. He does not know if those things were true. He has spent 5 years deciding that the truth of the belief matters less than the truth of the man who held it, and the man, by every account he has gathered, was real. Sad and wrong about some things, and real. The road runs east. Jon follows it. He is 15 years old and riding toward his own name, and the north falls behind him like a dream you remember clearly and carry with you into the waking world. The narrow sea is cold and grey, and nothing like anything Jon has ever seen. He stands at the prow of the merchant vessel as Westeros disappears behind them, and the open water opens in front of them, and he does not think about the fact that he has never been on a ship before, or that the sea is larger than anything he was prepared for, or that the cliffs of the continent where he was born are shrinking into something that looks, from here, like it could be small. He thinks about Pentos. He thinks about a house in a city he has never visited, where 2 people are living on the sufferance of a wealthy magister, and the slowly dimming hope that the world will one day turn back in their direction. Howland Reed stands beside him and says nothing, the way Howland does most things, competently, and without taking up more space than the task requires. The crossing takes 2 days. Essos is warm in a way the north is not, even in autumn, and the free cities are built differently than anything Jon has ever seen, layered and loud and coloured, with the smell of the sea overlaid by things the sea does not carry in Westeros. They travel overland to Pentos, moving as what they appear to be, a young man of no particular distinction, and his older companion, passing through without reason to remember them. Varys's contacts find them, rather than the other way around. A woman at a market stall passes Howland a folded note while pretending to make change. The note contains an address and a time, nothing else. It is the same method Jon saw used in Old Town, which is either Varys's preferred style, or the only style worth having. They go in the morning. The house is large. Not a palace, a magister's house, comfortable and walled, with the particular quiet of a place where guests are kept who are not quite residents and not quite free. They are expected. A servant brings them inside without a word, through corridors that smell of incense and something older, and then through a door into a room that is furnished well and feels strange in the way of rooms where waiting has gone on for a long time. Viserys is standing at the window. He is 22 or 23, silver-haired and tall, with the sharp bones of a man who has not always eaten as well as he would like, and the bearing of someone who has spent his whole life being told that his bearing is all he has. He turns when they enter, and his eyes move across them, the way eyes move across strangers in foreign cities, categorizing, suspicious, ready to be disappointed. Then they stop on Jon. Jon meets his gaze. He takes a breath. He says, "My name is Aegon Targaryen. I am the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark of Winterfell. They were married in Dorne, in secret, before the rebellion. I was born at the Tower of Joy. I was taken north by Ned Stark and raised as his bastard son. I have evidence of all of this, and a living witness who was there." The room is very quiet. Jon reaches into his shirt and takes out the oilskin parcel and sets it on the table between them. Viserys does not move immediately. He looks at the parcel. He looks at Jon. He looks at Howland Reed, who is standing near the door with his arms at his sides and the patient face of a man who has rehearsed this moment and knows there is nothing more to do than let it happen. Then Viserys looks back at Jon, and something in his face does something that is not quite anger and not quite fear, but contains something of both. He says, "Anyone can claim a name?" Jon says, "Yes, I have brought a man who was there." Howland steps forward. He does not raise his voice. He tells Viserys what he tells anyone he has to tell. The Tower of Joy, the three Kingsguard, the fight, the door, the sound of Lyanna's voice through it. He tells him what he saw when Ned Stark came back out of that tower with an infant and a face that had been broken open from the inside. He tells him about the name Lyanna whispered. He tells him what Rhaegar believed about the third child, and what that belief had cost him, and what it had tried to build in the ruins of the cost. He tells it the way he always tells it, plainly, from a careful distance, without embellishment, the way truth survives best. Viserys listens. His jaw is tight and his hands are still, and when Howland is finished, there is a silence that goes on longer than silences usually go. Then Viserys says, "Any man can write a letter. Any Crannog man can tell a story." He says it to Howland, and not to Jon, which is the kind of anger that knows it cannot afford to be fully directed. Jon does not respond. He has expected this. He watches Viserys and waits. Then a voice says, from the far side of the room, "He looks like him." Jon turns. Daenerys Targaryen has been in the room the entire time. She is sitting in a chair near the wall, with her hands folded in her lap. Small and very still, and he did not notice her when he came in, because she was not moving, and she is the kind of person who can choose not to be noticed when she decides to. She is 14 or 15, slight, with silver gold hair the color of pale fire, and eyes that are violet and very steady. She does not look like anything Jon has ever seen. She looks exactly like what she is. Viserys says, "What do you know about what he looked like?" "You never met him." Daenerys says, "I have his eyes. I know what they look like." She is looking at Jon when she says it. Jon looks back at her. He does not know what he expected from this meeting. He has been building toward it for 6 years, has rehearsed this introduction in his head on cold mornings in Winterfell and on the deck of a merchant ship crossing the narrow sea. And none of the rehearsals contained what he is experiencing now, which is the strange and specific recognition of looking at someone who carries the same inheritance you do, expressed differently in a different body, reading the same thing in your face that you are reading in theirs. She stands. She crosses to the table. She picks up the oilskin parcel and opens it and unfolds the letter and reads it. She reads it once and folds it again and sets it back on the table. And then she looks at Jon with those steady violet eyes and says, "What do you want from us?" Jon says, "I wanted you to know I exist. Everything after that is conversation." Something in her face does something very small and very certain, the kind of thing that happens in faces when a thing that was uncertain has been decided. She nods. Viserys says, from across the room, in a voice that is trying to be the voice of authority and is not quite making it, "He could be anyone." Daenerys looks at her brother. She says, "He is not anyone." She says it with the quietness of someone who has been surviving on very little for a very long time and has learned that certainty is a resource that must be spent carefully. She has spent it. Jon can see that it is not a performance. The three of them stand in a room in a borrowed house, in a city none of them were born in, and outside the window, Pentos goes about its ordinary afternoon, and the world doesn't know this room exists. Jon doesn't move to press the advantage. He doesn't ask Viserys for acknowledgement. He doesn't tell them what he plans to do. He lets the letter sit on the table between them and looks at his father's sister, silver-haired and violet-eyed. Everything he is not on the outside and something he recognizes beyond the outside, and understands that Varys was right. The girl is the one who matters. The girl has already decided. The alliance between them is a seed. It is not an army. It is not a fleet, or a claim, or a declaration. It is a 14-year-old girl and a 15-year-old boy in a room in Essos, each of them carrying a name and a dynasty's wreckage, each of them the last of something that has not yet finished deciding what it will be. Whatever comes next has not come yet, but it is coming. That is our theory. Westeros is a land filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and the story of a boy who found his true names in the dark of Winterfell's crypts and carried it across a continent and a sea to the one place in the world where it could be spoken aloud without costing him everything.